All right, new region that we're looking at. Each chapter that we go through, there's a lot of information that, you've already gotten, right? So we've actually already studied the history of colonialism in this region quite a bit. We'll come back to it, but a lot of stuff you already know, right? Um, let's see. Let me just jump into talking about. This region has a large variety of climates for a lot of different reasons. One of the reasons is because the range of this area from north to south is so huge, but also within it, well, you can't tell from this map because it shows general things, but you can tell a little bit. There's all kinds of little microclimates all along these mountains. You have microclimates, and so it's really actually difficult to tell. You could look at this chart and see these climate classifications, but if you're on the ground here, there could be a wide variety depending on how high or low you are in your altitude. Let's see. One thing that is consistent with the central part of this region is it is in what's called the doldrums. The doldrums, we've talked before about how hurricanes need to have a certain amount of twist and heat from the ocean to build up, and that's why it's kind of a surprise that hurricanes are going as far north as they are these days. Well, around the equator you have the opposite. You have plenty of heat, but you don't have any twisting in the atmosphere. So you have kind of, how many people have kind of been to the Carribean, into that area a bit? You might notice that it's kind of always raining, but it's a very light rain, but it's kind of like very persistent. That's what the doldrums are. And it's a part of this area. So very often you'll get rain just like every day, like very often in the mornings or something. Now there's all kinds of different charts and graphs in the book about how when you change altitude, you change your different climates, right? Climates and climate and your different agricultural crops. That's one of the reasons why this region also has a large range of crops because of the large range of different altitudes. Just another depiction of the same thing. Now, what does come up in this region when we talk about deforestation, which is something we talk about in plenty of other chapters, but deforestation, so it's tough to understand how this leads to desertification, because even with the forest cut, there should be a certain amount of rain that still happens. But what will happen is you'll cut down the rainforest, and there's less moisture going into the air. If you have a place that is, in general, the climate is drying a bit, you could have an area that had been basically tropical and starts to dry out. There's areas of Brazil that are becoming semi-desert just because, well, the rainforests have been cut and then the land isn't maintained. There's lots of landslides, so you often can't even get small brush and stuff growing because you have all these kind of problems going on. The book talks a lot about Costa Rica as a good example of a lot of the different phenomena that we're talking about. Anyone been to Costa Rica? Costa Rica? A couple of people, all right, great. Costa Rica, like a lot of areas in the region, does not have a lot of fossil fuels for energy, so they're really starting to invest in wind power, and especially because there are so many mountains, there's lots of areas that the wind is consistently flowing through, so it's a good resource for them to invest in, especially since they don't have other stuff locally, they have to ship it in. In the region, the only area that really has a lot of fossil fuels would be Venezuela. It has a fair amount of oil. And it shares its oil with other countries and sells it locally. But again, if you can get a resource from it internally rather than get it from externally, it's better for your economy. This is what's called a cloud forest. A cloud forest. That is, I showed you before, orographic precipitation is air mass is pushed up, it cools off, and it precipitates out. So you get areas within the mountains where you just kind of have a constant, it seems like fog, called a cloud forest. This is when you get to the tops of a lot of different mountains in the region. One other kind of interesting thing in this region is if you go up in elevation, even if it's just slightly, because it will change the climate a bit. It'll cool off quite a bit, and so a lot of people prioritize, if they can, living at kind of the highest local area that they can, because you'll get the most breeze. It'll be the coolest, and there's a bit of a hierarchy as well. Whereas in a lot of areas, it's the poorer populations that are kind of stuck living at the lower altitudes, which are often could be just very, very muggy, very, very uncomfortable. Let's see, just some sprawling development. Sprawl being a thing that, of course, we talked about in North America, but now it's something that's happening kind of around the world. It was a dry season when I went. I don't know if you could, well, you can see all these are clouds, right? I don't know if you could see this. Zoom up a little bit. Slash and burn agriculture, which is a term that we talked about in the first few chapters. It comes back again because it's a common form of agriculture in this region. And just a reminder, slash and burn agriculture, if we're talking about small populations in a small area for a small amount of time, it makes sense, right? Rainforest, you get a lot of rain, nutrients are leached out of the soils, so the soils will have a lot of nutrients. So if you cut down a little bit of the rainforest, set it on fire, you could use that ash as fertilizer, could get a few good growing seasons, but it doesn't last long and you have to move on. What's changed through time is a lot of countries have seen these areas as places to develop permanently and put them in permanent cultivation. The difficulty with that, though, slash and burn agriculture, especially in the tropics, well, you've cut down the rainforest. After a couple of years, the ash and whatnot that you're using as fertilizer has washed off because it's still tropical, right? And then if you want to turn that area into permanent cultivation, you need a lot of money because you need herbicides and pesticides and fertilizers and all kinds of stuff, right? You need the newest green crops, all kinds of things that are expensive. In the area, well, in tropical areas, I don't know if you can see this red color here, the soils are often this red color. This is a road being put in, and that's one of the times you can kind of see the underlying soils. They're a red color because of all that rain, little particles of metal rust in the soils. And so when you dig, especially if you get a fresh dig, it'll be very orange in color. Lots of these areas that we're talking about have very low elevations. And the reason this matters is, well, it's an area of a lot of tectonic activity, a lot of earth shifting, and so you could have things like tsunamis. Even though hurricanes are more rare in these areas, they do happen more than zero. They'll often kind of come from a slightly north or slightly south. But if you have areas that have a lot of development going in that are just inches above sea level, as you can imagine, that causes quite a bit of a problem. What this picture is pretty common in the area. You have the ocean, and you'll have water flowing out, right, bring particles, and so this is basically just land that has been sediment from rivers. I've been putting a little bit of land out here for a good amount of time, but again, just above sea level. And again, like I said, sprawling suburbs and things like that, it's becoming a thing worldwide, not just a thing to talk about in our chapter in North America. This is the dry season, so that's one of the reasons why a lot of these fields are not super green. And these are, the reason that they're circular is they're center pivot irrigation systems. This is a very cheap way to irrigate. Just flying over. This is still Costa Rica. As I said, it was the dry season. You can see the fresh water mixed with the salt water, right? That's how much precipitation and wash off you have. As I said again, a lot of tectonic activity. Basically, you can tell a place has a lot of tectonic activity if the elevations change rapidly, right? And so this area very clearly being pushed up. All right, agricultural systems. Well, again, these are things we talked about in the first couple of chapters. The Columbian Exchange, right? What things did we get from this region? What things were transferred from the regions to this region? This is one of the reasons why agricultural productivity really took off after the Columbian Exchange. A lot of varieties of things. We're able to find new climates, new homes. The agricultural system during colonialism, and again, this is one of the areas that had a huge set of colonial legacies, specifically from Spain and Portugal in this region. But in a nutshell, what happened was the conquistadors, or people who came with the conquistadors, they wanted to set up an arrangement similar to what was existed in their feudal relationship back in their home country. So in their home country, feudal system, you have a king and queen, and they have control over an area of land, and technically that area of land, they protect the people in there from other areas. But mostly what they do is they control that population and they take those resources from the population. In this example, and again, it was similar to what was going on in Portugal and Spain. Again, protect the people within your territory. Teach them the language of your country. But with that language, cultural norms, like the religion of your country that you're from, right? And again, this was colonialism and imperialism, the same thing we've talked about many times, very much at play here. The people who lived within the territory that you had under control, you could demand whatever payment from them you kind of felt like. So you had a big mixture of places where some people would have huge requirements of gold and labor. In other areas, they would just kind of require a certain amount of agricultural products, kind of depended. But this is one of the reasons why this system led to a lot of unrest, because it wasn't, a fair system. And you really had depended on the luck of what area you were born in. So let's see. These systems have kind of evolved. We still use the term plantation, although in a lot of people's minds that is connected to slavery. The word is still used, even though obviously we're post-slavery in the area. And you have a lot of farming are the small scale, small lot that you could have a family or multiple families. And then you also have these gigantic farms that are done by kind of mega corporations. One development that has been going on that I found of particular interest, this is still in Costa Rica, was there's been a lot of money put into putting tunnels in through the different mountains. And this has actually been able to bring countries together in a way that they had not been before. A lot of these countries, they have a mountain kind of going through the side of them. And so you'll have an east coast and a west coast that don't actually interact that much, just because it's hugely expensive to travel. But now with a lot of tunnels have been putting in, a lot of countries are kind of uniting in ways that they never had before. A term from this chapter, banana republic. Banana republic, it doesn't always actually specifically refer to banana crops. It more refers to how you'll have a country that is reliant on one product, and one cheap product, and a product that does not give the people who labor in it a very high wage, right? And you'll have local policies that will try to kind of change out of this type of economy. But very often you'll have a ruling government that are just literally paid off by, banana companies or other companies that want to keep the prices low. Back in the 70s, there was an effort to diversify the economies of this area. This chapter uses the term import substitution industrialization. And this is a term that has actually been used before. But in this region, it was, as I said, used in the 70s as an effort to try to rebuild their economies, modernize. I know I've explained it before, but I'm going to explain it again. Import substitution industrialization. What that means is, like, let's say you have a country. In your country, let's say you want people to have cars, right? Let's say you're living there and you want a car. You want your economy to have cars. Well, you import cars, right? And they cost a lot. Local labor doesn't make a lot of money. And you realize, well, a better idea would be, of course, if locally you built your own cars and the jobs building cars pay more. And so those people would be able to buy more products. So you would boost the local economy in different things. And I use an example of cars, but it really depended on the country and kind of what they were trying to do. But that's import substitution industrialization. When I say import substitution, we have cars that are being imported, and your country can just literally say, well, so the government, we're going to take money and we're going to invest it in a car company, and it's going to be owned by the government at first, just until it gets on its feet, and then we'll privatize or whatever. And some countries did this with a number of different types of products, and actually it was doing an okay job of developing and industrializing and diversifying a lot of economies. But, well, I talked about the fuel crisis in the 1970s, sky high oil prices, a lot of economies around the world kind of went into stop, if not reverse. Many countries in this area reached out internationally to the IMF and the World Bank. Again, things we talked about in the first couple of chapters. For short-term loans to basically keep the government running. But the IMF and the World Bank, especially at the time, 70s and 80s, what they said was, sure, we'll loan you money so that you could keep your schools open and stuff like that. But you can't do the import substitution industrialization anymore because we want to sell more cars. So don't do that anymore. And when that switched up, a lot of these countries fell back into the few agricultural crops that were making a lot of money. And a lot of them, they've tried to diversify more recently into tourism and things like that, but a lot of them feel a bit stuck. As I said, a lot of these gigantic fruit companies are United States companies. Got some pictures of some different crops. I don't know if people can tell what this crop is. It's tough to tell from this picture because there's a rain on it, I know. These are actually pineapples. People kind of picture them growing like apples on a tree, but we plant them in the ground and harvest them that way. This is a banana plantation, and in a lot of these different countries, the banana plantations will just kind of go on and on and on and on. They're just gigantic. I watched some amount of some banana harvesting. You can see that they're in these blue bags. They have a system, before the modern age, what you would have is, like people still grew bananas there, before Columbus and everything, growing bananas. Growing bananas, usually what you would do as a farmer is you would maybe put something else at the bottom of your banana tree, like nuts or something that would put nitrates into the soil because the banana uses a lot of nitrates. Usually they would do multiple different types of crops kind of in the one area. It's very labor intensive and not something you could do mass produced. Modern day, their system is basically you have kind of groupings of 3 banana trees, and in the clusters of 3, they'll be in different stages. And also in this type of growing, this requires a lot of fertilizers, a lot of pesticides, a lot of herbicides, to be as productive as possible. But they put a blue bag around it when it's ready to be harvested. And then you'll notice that they'll have a tree that has just been cut, a tree that's ready for harvesting, and the next one kind of coming up. That way you could kind of time out and have kind of a constant amount of bananas coming. And they just take the bananas and put them on this thing. As I said, banana plantations just kind of go on and on and on. The other thing that's been in, obviously, the news a lot is the decline of the rainforest, especially in the Amazon region. This area here that is being circled, this is an area that actually is hitting the most kind of desertification, drying out. This area of the Amazon is still pretty thick with forest, but the tough thing is when it comes to kind of saving the rainforest or not saving the rainforest, it really depends on, in these different countries, kind of whoever is elected or takes power. Because you could have some presidents, like there was a president of Brazil, who felt very strongly that the Amazon forest was part of the national heritage and that it should be preserved and that it was like a global, part of our global heritage. The current president of Brazil, very different mindset. He literally wants to cut down as much as possible for the financial money that the wood would bring in and have it changed into urbanization and farms, which is what much of the rest of the world has done with their forests. So it's not like they'd be doing something that was that different. It's one of the last really huge rainforests that there is, but like I said, it really depends. I talked about tourism being an alternative strategy for growth in the region. This is a pretty recent thing, and even more recent of tourism is ecotourism. This is a term that comes up in our book some different times. Ecotourism basically is just tourism that is trying to not destroy the stuff you're visiting when you destroy it, so that it could be preserved as a sustainable resource. All right. In Costa Rica, I went to a couple different places that sold themselves as ecotourism, and it was really a mixed bag. Kind of depended. Sometimes it's just a marketing strategy. I went to an area that was pretty interesting that was a monkey preserve. And well, it was an area that had been thickly forested, and then